Today we're going to be talking about population dynamics, which is really how populations of living things increase, decrease, what affects populations, and how they function. So let's start with the definition of what a population is. Population is just a group of individuals of the same species in a particular place. So if we're discussing humans, that's a population. It's one type of living thing, one type of species in one area. So that's what a population is. It's one type of living thing or species. So here's just some basic reasons populations would grow. Obviously, births or immigration, organisms moving into the area. And populations would decrease because of the opposite, deaths and emigration or organisms moving out of the area. So what we have is a term called exponential growth, and especially with humans, we've been seeing a lot of exponential growth. It's the rapid increase of a population. So a larger number of individuals is added in each generation, and technically it would mean that the number is constantly doubling over and over. And as far as humans go, we've been seeing lots of exponential growth in the human population, especially the last 100 years. So I want to show you what the actual graph of exponential growth would look like. Down here on the X, we have time and number of organisms. So exponential growth curve takes on a shape like this, where here we're seeing the population increasing, 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 increasing. This is also called a J curve, which you can tell by what the curve looks like. So as far as humans, we're right here right now. We're increasing, increasing, increasing as far as our population on the planet. Considering populations, there's something called limiting factors, which would be things that limit or inhibit how much the population can actually grow. So they're going to be things like food, water, shelter, sunlight. If there's only so much food, you can only have so many of that population. Living things need to have food to survive. Same thing with water. If clean water runs out, that's going to affect the population because populations need to have those things in order to live. So those are going to be some of our limiting factors, which could limit the population if there's not enough of these things. We have two types that limiting factors fit into. The first type is called density dependent. So this means it depends on how many organisms there are, like how densely packed the population is. It depends on this. So some examples of this would be things like disease. If a certain individual comes down with a disease, and if they're closely packed in with other individuals, it's going to mean that that disease can spread faster through that population. So it depends on how densely packed they are. Same thing with food. If you're densely packed, there might be competition over the food or the water. So this depends on how many organisms there are, as opposed to the density independent limiting factors. This doesn't matter how many individuals they are. It doesn't matter how large or small the population is. These would be things like a hurricane. If a hurricane comes ashore and wipes out an ecosystem, it doesn't matter if there's 10 organisms living there or 10,000. It doesn't care. So these would be density independent. They affect how many organisms can survive, but it doesn't matter how many there are. A lot of these things are natural disaster type things or habitat destruction. If we clear out a forest to build a shopping mall, it doesn't matter if there's 50 squirrels that live there or 500, and we've taken away all of their habitat. This brings us to the word carrying capacity. There's only so much food, water, space in an environment, so there is a carrying capacity or a maximum population the environment can support for a long period of time. So if we stick with the squirrel example, I guess, in a forest there's only so much food, so many trees that a squirrel can live in, get food from. So it can't just become overrun with squirrels because eventually they'll run out of food, they'll run out of space, their population will level off. So let's come back over here and do another graph that shows carrying capacity. We can stay with the same X and Y, time and number of organisms. So for carrying capacity, what you're going to see is the population will grow, but then it kind of stops growing, and over time it sort of takes on a curve like this, where at this point it's going up, and then down here it's kind of going down, and then it's going up, and then it's going down. And so whatever kind of average, can do a rough average here, whatever that average is between that population going up and going down would be the carrying capacity. So whatever number that ended up to be would be how many organisms that environment could support over time. And this curve is called an S-curve for the carrying capacity. And all organisms reach this. Us as humans, we're still in this part of the carrying capacity. We haven't really reached this stage where our numbers have leveled off on the planet. But all organisms eventually reach this because there's only so much food, water. You have limiting factors that are really kind of pushing this population down because there's only so much resources for those living things to be able to consume. Okay, let's come back over to the presentation. Just a couple of notes on different reproduction patterns for living things, because there's all kinds of living things on the planet. Some living things have what's called a rapid life history, where they have a short lifespan. They're usually small, like insects or bacteria, that kind of thing. They reproduce really quickly. You know, bacteria might just divide itself and keep reproducing many, many times in just an hour. So they reproduce fast, but they don't live very long, and so they would have a rapid life history pattern, as opposed to something like humans or larger organisms. They have a slow life history pattern where they mature slowly. They don't reproduce a whole lot during their lifetime. They tend to kind of stay at a carrying capacity where they're not just like increasing and then shooting down and then increasing and then going down. They kind of level off and tend to sort of stay level at a certain population. And that's all we have to say about populations.